Bora, how do you see the telco operator of today having to change and evolve their business models to be able to compete in a very difficult market that we find ourselves in today?
Thanks for the question, Permission. I think it's interesting because telecommunications and now overreaching digital environment that it serves to has been evolving quite drastically particularly over the last 2 decades. And we have seen communication service providers coming from traditional voice and messaging focused business models to the telcos of today, which are not necessarily just focusing on 1 or 2 products, but offering quite a wide range of digital services. Now, going forward, I think the implications of this is going to be even more drastic because we have seen, particularly over the past decade, the introduction and kind of dominance of really innovative services from the over-the-top players. And this includes, voice and messaging to start with, which made, this kind of services really commoditized today. And we have also seen them getting into, other core revenue sources of the traditional telcos and communication service providers, as I refer to it today.
There's an interesting nuance that I've picked up, because it would appear that, originally we referred to telco operators as mobile network operators, then it kind of evolved to telco operators, and now we're actually going to the space of calling them communication service providers. And for me, that nuance is actually interesting because it talks to the evolving nature of these businesses. So from being capital intensive, infrastructure heavy businesses, it seems to be focused or growing in focus in terms of more service type businesses and service type offerings. Jonita, maybe it's appropriate for you to come in at this time to talk to us about the evolving nature of the infrastructure landscape for these operators to be successful.
Yes, certainly, Permission. It's really interesting time to be in the telecommunication space, as we are seeing, how the lines are starting to blur between a traditional mobile network operator and your traditional wireless operators, and now certainly the fixed line infrastructure providers. And I think what's interesting for the market certainly is, and it's evident by the M&A activity that we are witnessing right now, is just how reliant the communication, wireless communication certainly has become on infrastructure and vice versa. And we are seeing that the fixed line infrastructure providers are now looking at building towers, and they are considering themselves to be turnkey infrastructure providers, whether that is a wireless component or a fixed line component. They're certainly making substantial investments in all aspects of infrastructure provision.
What we're seeing quite clearly is a blurring of the lines between the different players in the industry. So what we would have seen as a mobile network operator providing voice and data services and also owning the infrastructure is now actually evolving into a digitally led services business. And I think my personal view is that is probably going to define the evolution of the winners and the losers. I think one of the challenges is for what we term now as the telco operators not to become utility type businesses. What would your views be on that?
Well, Permission, I guess this is really a defining question for most of the communication service providers of today, because as I mentioned, their traditional revenues have been eroding quite heavily through OTTs, and they are trying to find new revenue sources through digital services, including, on the enterprise space, really focusing on IT and cloud offerings. On consumer space, we have seen some of these communication service providers going into video, music, and entertainment type of services. And in your sector also, we have seen quite a lot of mobile money or digital finance type of offerings and insurance type of offerings led by the communication service providers. So obviously there's a soul search a bit within the communication service provider environment in terms of how they will evolve their businesses through probably partnership with other key players in the both from 4IR industry, fourth industrial revolution point of view, in terms of how do they make use of this digital development, both enterprise and consumer space point of view. But at the same time, I mean, they have the challenge of still supporting all these services with a infrastructure, which is very capital intensive. And obviously, under the light of eroding revenues, it is not an easy thing to deal with, because on one hand, you are earning less or your margins are getting tighter. On the other hand, you constantly need to spend more and more on the infrastructure. Now, what is naturally happening though is within past decade in particular, we have seen these independent infrastructure operators, owners and operators, who are kind of taking the ownership of these infrastructures, let it be towers, fiber, data center. We have seen on all core assets, and they are leveraging being an independent player, economy of scale, serving to multiple communication service providers, hence bringing the cost of capital investment down or more shared between different players. Now, this is started with focused asset. We have seen the emergence of towercos in Africa within the last 10 years in particular. In 2009, almost none of the towers were managed by towercos. Today, more than 60% of the towers on the continent are managed by these towercos. We have seen it from fiber point of view, independent players. We have seen many new entrants over there, all the way from Pan-African players like Liquid Telecom to DFAs of South Africa. And we have seen also carrier-neutral data centers like Terracos and all making strides in it, and we have seen quite a large investment and interest in this kind of assets. And globally also we have seen lots of really underlying real estate companies taking this data center play to a new level, like Equinix's or Digital Realty's, who are investing in underlying real estate aspect of it, over which then your both communication service providers and OTTs are taking services. Now, going forward, what is interesting is the dynamic within this infrastructure space as well, because as the service and infrastructure is kind of segregated, there is a need for infrastructure players to constantly reduce their costs as well. And on that note, I mean, they are looking for ways to optimize their, obviously cost structure, and it is not easy to find those synergies within the same asset. So therefore, I mean, on the other hand, communication service providers are looking for more end-to-end type of services. So this leads to cross-asset consolidation within the infrastructure space as well. And as we speak, there are lots of transactions happening or being considered between different asset owners. Let it be data center owners, fiber owners, or tower owners. They are each looking over the fence what's on the other side and how they can bring this closer together. So both on the infrastructure space, I would predict to get more consolidation and more M&A going on, or more closer cooperation between these players.
Can I maybe just pause you there, because it looks like there's a clear move, I guess, in a number of different aspects. The first is a clear focus on capital efficiency, and therefore the move towards outsourcing a part of the business that does not enhance necessarily its ability to compete in the market. So moving to a more efficient type business model where the capex intensive part of the business is actually outsourced, which then allows the telco to be competitive in the services element of the of its product and services. So, do you think that there's now the structural change in the industry is something that is going to be disruptive in a certain respect? You've mentioned that we're now seeing cross-asset consolidation. So telcos investing in fiber, potentially in data centers. What is the new level of telco infra company going to look like? Junita, do you want to comment on that?
I think we'll certainly see two types of telecommunication providers. Firstly, the asset owners, which will own the infrastructure, and that will be the fixed line as well as the tower, or if we look towards 5G, the antenna certainly, and including the data centers. And then I think we'll see MNOs move into a space where they capitalize on the amount of data that technology such as 5G will enable, and I think that they will look at intelligent ways of what they can do with that data, and of course to provide the applications. It's always been a bit of a chicken and an egg situation, because we want to launch the data intensive applications, but we haven't got the infrastructure, and the infrastructure companies have been nervous to invest substantially in the infrastructure in case we don't fill the pipes. But I think that we've crossed that now, and I think that there's a segment in the market now where companies have reinvented themselves, and I think they understand where they want to go and what they want to achieve, and it's very exciting.
So the way I think about the industry is that there's perhaps three levels. The base level is infrastructure. The second is then in terms of the radio access network, and it's arguable whether that is actually a subset of infrastructure or not, and we'll talk about that just now. And then the third level is in terms of services and the evolution of the services. So I think we've covered the infrastructure part of it, and I think clearly the theme that we're seeing is consolidation amongst infrastructure providers in the same theme, but then also, as Bora pointed out, across asset consolidation, and I think that's going to be an ever-evolving space.